A dark bedroom at Fort Sumner in the New Mexico Territory in July of 1881. Pat Garrett sits against the wall in the black, holding his breath. A young man steps through the open door and asks into the dark who is there. One revolver speaks, and Billy the Kid is dead before he reaches the floor. That pistol walked out of that room and into 100 years of legend. But it leaves a question behind it. Was that gun ever the one a real frontierman carried every single day of his life? Now, before we go any further, tap that subscribe button and keep watching to the end, because the end has all the answers for your questions. We are not going to the movies for this. We are going to the men who were there, the Army ordnance reports, the inquest records, the newspapers that printed the morning after, and the guns themselves, resting now behind museum glass. Today, there are more firearms in America than there are people. Back then, a single good gun could cost a man a full month of wages, and the nearest gunsmith was a hard day's ride away. So let us start at the bottom with the guns most men actually carried and work our way up to the one on every poster. Number 15. The pepperbox pistol. This is the gun a greenhorn actually bought before he set out west. It was a fat cluster of barrels that turned all at once, made by Ethan Allen of Massachusetts. Mark Twain carried one across the plains and wrote about it in Roughing It in 1872. He said it would never hit what a man aimed at, and sometimes it fired every barrel at once. Hollywood never put this gun on a poster, and that is exactly why it matters. The deadliest gun on the frontier was rarely the famous one. Hold on to that, because we are coming back to it. Number 14. The hideout gun. One barrel, one shot. The last word a man kept up a sleeve or inside a coat. It was made by Henry Derringer of Philadelphia, his name spelled with one R. The cheap copies added a second R, and that misspelling became the word we still use. On the 14th of April, 1865, John Wilkes Booth carried one into Ford's Theater. A single .44 caliber ball ended Abraham Lincoln. The most famous shot in American history came from a palm-sized pistol with a short, fat barrel. You did not see it coming. By the time it appeared, the argument was already over. Number 13. The Northwest Trade Gun. You have likely never heard its name, and yet it was the most widely carried gun in the early West. A plain, smoothbore flintlock, traded by the thousand out of the forts of the Hudson's Bay Company. A man bought one with beaver pelts in what the trade called made beaver. You can still know one by the brass serpent set into the side of the stock, a mark the tribes prized. No author wrote it into a novel. No studio built it a legend. It carried the real weight of the early frontier, and history walked right past it. Number 12. The Kentucky Long Rifle. The slim flintlock of the eastern woods, a barrel near 5 feet long over a stock of curly maple. This is the gun of Daniel Boone and the men who first crossed the mountains. On the 8th of January, 1815, frontier riflemen under Andrew Jackson cut down the British line at New Orleans. The redcoats called them the Dirty Shirts, but here is where the timing turns. By the day of the cowboy and the cattle drive, this rifle was already old. The Kentucky rifle won an earlier America. By the time the legends of the Wild West began, it was hanging over the fireplace, retired. Number 11. The Hawken rifle. Now we reach the gun of the mountain men. It was built in St. Louis by two brothers, Jacob and Samuel Hawken, near the gateway to the west. Short and heavy, a big bore half-stock made to drop a buffalo or a charging grizzly. The legend says Jim Bridger and Kit Carson carried Hawkens into the high country. Some of that is documented, and some was stitched on later. A trapper trusted his Hawken the way he trusted his own two hands. 1,000 miles from any gunsmith, that rifle was the difference between a winter survived and a body never found. Number 10. The Lumat Revolver. One of the strangest guns the frontier ever saw. 9 shots in the cylinder, which rotated around a second barrel hidden underneath. A short shotgun built into the core of the pistol. It was invented in New Orleans by a doctor named Jean-Alexandre Lamott. Confederate officers swore by it, among them the cavalry general known as Jeb Stuart. When the war ended, beaten men carried these guns west and started over. 9 pistol rounds, and then 1 devastating blast for the man who got too close. Today, almost no one remembers it existed. Number 9. The Colt Navy of 1851. Before metal cartridges existed, this was the revolver a serious man actually wore. Loose powder, a ball rammed home, and a copper cap on every nipple. James Butler Hickok carried a matched pair, ivory-handled, worn butt forward. He wore them still on the 2nd of August, 1876, the day Jack McCall walked up behind him in a Deadwood saloon and shot him through the head at the poker table. The man who became the model for every movie gunfighter was carrying percussion revolvers years after cartridge guns arrived. The gun you picture is not the gun he wore. We forgot the real one. Number 8. The Henry Rifle, the gun that turned one man into a wall of fire. 16 brass cartridges in a tube beneath the barrel, and a lever that threw them out as fast as a man could work his arm. It was perfected in 1860 by Benjamin Tyler Henry in the New Haven shop of Oliver Winchester. The Confederate soldiers who faced it left us its finest description: that damned Yankee rifle you loaded on Sunday and fired all week. One soldier with 16 rounds against men still ramming a single ball down a muzzle. It was the difference between living through an ambush and dying in one. Number 7. The Sharps Rifle, the Buffalo Gun. The men who hunted the great herds called the largest one the Big 50 for a cartridge as long as a man's finger. On the 27th of June, 1874, a hunter named Billy Dixon was pinned down with others at adobe walls in the Texas Panhandle. He took up a borrowed Sharps and dropped a warrior from his horse at a distance later surveyed at 1,538 yards. Whether it was skill or pure luck is honestly disputed, and Dixon himself called it a scratch shot. But the Sharps did darker work. The hide hunters brought the southern herd to almost nothing in a few short years. Number 6. The Plain Shotgun. This is the one I need you to remember. While the legends got the posters, this humble gun did the quiet killing. A cheap double barrel that hung over the door of nearly every cabin and rode on every wagon seat. Wells Fargo paid men to sit beside the driver and guard the express box, and that seat gave us a phrase we still use: riding shotgun. On the 26th of October, 1881, on Fremont Street in Tombstone, Doc Holliday raised a borrowed coach gun and killed Tom McClory at the fight near the OK Corral. No fast draw, no careful aim, just 2 short barrels and a load of buckshot at close range. It asked no skill of the frightened man who held it. Remember number 6. We are coming back to it. Number 5. The Spencer Repeater. The gun that helped win a war and then went looking for another. 7 cartridges fed through a tube in the buttstock, a lever that chambered each one in a heartbeat. Christopher Spencer carried it to the man at the very top. In August of 1863, he handed it to Abraham Lincoln, who walked out onto the grounds near the White House and fired it himself. The president was impressed. His own War Department was not, and clung to the single shot. After the war, the Spencer rode west by the thousand, proof held in two hands that the world had already moved on. Number 4. The Springfield Trapdoor, the Army's single shot chosen over the repeaters. The breech flipped up like a little door for one long cartridge at a time. On the 25th of June, 1876, the 7th Cavalry carried it into the valley of the Little Bighorn in Montana Territory under George Custer. Not one of the men with him on that hill walked off it alive. Years later, archaeologists found spent cartridge cases scarred by the extractor. The soft copper had swelled in the heat, and some rifles jammed in the worst minutes of those men's lives. How much that failure decided the slaughter is genuinely disputed, but the men prying at jammed breeches with knives while the circle closed were real. Number 3. The Smith & Wesson Model 3. And here the legend begins to crack. While the world remembers the Colt, it was Smith & Wesson that first built a practical big-bore cartridge revolver for the West. Its whole frame broke open at a hinge. Tip it forward, and every empty shell flew out at once, ready to reload in seconds. A Colt of the same years was still being loaded, one slow chamber at a time. The Army bought thousands of the improved Schofield model. The outlaw Jesse James is bound to the Schofield in both the record and the legend. So the faster, more modern revolver was not the famous one, because the most famous gun of all is next, and the story does not end where you think. Number 2. The Winchester of 1873, the gun that won the West. Except that line was never a verdict handed down by history. It was a slogan stamped on by the company that sold the rifle. The gun itself was a marvel. It fired the same .44-40 cartridge as the Colt revolver, so a man could carry one box of ammunition for both his rifle and his pistol. And then, in 1950, a film called Winchester 73 put the rifle in James Stewart's hands and fixed its glory for a whole new century. Much of what you feel about this gun was sold to you by a company and by a movie, because number 1 is where the whole legend was born. Number 1. The Colt Single Action Army, the Peacemaker. Let us go back to that dark room at Fort Sumner now, in close, the way it happened. It is past midnight, the 14th of July, 1881. Pat Garrett sits in the black bedroom of his friend Pete Maxwell. A barefoot young man steps through the open door, a knife in one hand, a revolver in the other. He feels someone there and asks in Spanish, "Who is it?" Garrett raises his Colt and fires twice. One ball finds the heart. Billy the Kid falls without a sound, dead on the floorboards in the time it takes to draw a breath. That revolver sold new for around $17. In 2021, the very gun that killed the kid sold at auction for nearly $6 million. So, number 1, mystery solved. Except it is not, because the deeper you go into the record, the stranger the legend looks. The movies sold us a clean ritual. 2 men in a dusty street at high noon, the faster draw, walking away alive. Read the inquest records and the old newspapers, and that duel almost never happened. Real killing was close and sudden and ugly. A shot from behind in a crowded saloon. A shotgun in a doorway. A drunk man surprised in the dark. Even number 1 was no fair fight. Garrett shot a barefoot boy in a black room with no warning. And the book that made the Kid immortal, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid from 1882, carried Garrett's name. But it was mostly written by a newspaperman named Marshall Ashman Upson. So who built the false legend? Three hands shaped it. First, the dime novelists, who took ambushes and barroom brawls and stretched them into noble duels in the sun. Second, the biographers. A writer named Stuart Lake gave the world the Buntline Special, a long-barreled Colt he claimed was handed to Wyatt Earp by the writer Ned Buntline. Historians today believe that gun was very likely invented at a desk. And third, Hollywood. The studios named the Colt the Peacemaker and the Equalizer, built the quick-draw showdown out of thin air, and dressed an actor in a clean white hat who never sweated a day or cast a single lead ball. The men who lived it would not recognize the gun that carries their story. So here is my answer to the question I asked you at the very start. The deadliest gun a frontier man carried was not number 1, it was number 6. It was the plain shotgun, cheap, unremarkable, and hanging in nearly every home in the country. The Colt earned its fame in a handful of named killings, then spent 100 years being polished by men who were never there. The shotgun did the real and ugly work for 50 years. In cold cabins and dark doorways in the hands of tired and frightened ordinary men. And it never once got a poster or a song. Today, there are more firearms in America than there are people, and most of their owners have never seated a percussion cap or cast a single ball. Back then, the gun over the door was the line between walking home and being carried there. The frontier did not hand its legends to the guns that did the work. It handed them to the ones the storytellers chose. And somewhere, underground that was never marked, lies a man who killed and died with a plain shotgun in his hands. He fed his family with it. He guarded his own door with it. And not one soul alive today can tell you his name.